There are things you learn about a person after the crisis passes, not during it. During it, everyone is performing their best version of themselves, the most capable, the most composed, the most certain. It is afterward, when the adrenaline has settled, and the paperwork is filed, and the door has been closed, and the silence has finally become comfortable, that you discover who a person actually is, when nothing is requiring them to be exceptional. Genevieve had learned this about herself first. She had discovered, in the months after Marlon left, that she was someone who woke at 5 in the morning, not from anxiety, but from appetite. That she had opinions about furniture she had suppressed for 7 years because Marlon found her taste too bold. That she could spend an entire Saturday doing nothing that served anyone but herself and feel not guilt, but something so close to joy she had stopped trying to find a more precise word for it. She had learned that she was funnier than she remembered being, that her laugh, when it came from the real place, made other people laugh before they had even processed the joke. She had learned that she was, without the weight of someone else's survival on her shoulders, extraordinarily light.
She had also learned, and this was the part she had not expected, that she was capable of being afraid again. Not the old fear. The old fear had been specific and structural, the fear of a woman who has realized she is standing on a platform that is moving in a direction she did not choose and cannot easily exit. That fear had been managed by information, by lawyers, by the quiet, decisive movements of a woman who had decided to know exactly where she stood. This fear was different. This fear had a face, and it was the face of someone she loved. She had not told Gongyo everything immediately. This was not dishonesty. It was the specific caution of a woman who had learned, at significant cost, the difference between trusting someone with your vulnerability and trusting someone with the full weight of your history before you understood the full weight of theirs. She had told him enough. She had told him about Marlon's nature, about the years of quiet extraction, about the balcony and the words she had heard and what she had done with them. He had listened with the particular quality of attention she had come to understand was his truest self, not nodding at intervals to signal understanding, but going very still, taking in the full shape of what she was saying before he responded to any part of it. What he had said, when she finished, was, "You didn't leave immediately." It was not an accusation. It was an observation. And the weight it carried was entirely about what came before it, which was the silence of a man who was calculating something. She had said, "No, I needed to understand it fully first." He had nodded. Then he had said, "That's not a weakness." She had said, "I know that now." He had looked at her with those dark eyes and said, "I mean, it wasn't a weakness even before you knew it." And she had felt something ease in her that she had not known was still clenched. What she had not told him, because she was still telling it to herself, was how much she had enjoyed it. Not the betrayal, not the discovery of Marlon's contempt, not the cold clarity of those weeks, but the other part. The part where she had been for the first time in 7 years, entirely the author of her own decisions, where every move she made was calculated not against someone else's needs, but toward her own dignity, where her intelligence had served her completely and without apology. She had been good at it. That was the part she sat with in the mornings before Gong-yo woke. That she had been very good at being the woman who dismantled a carefully constructed trap from the inside, quietly, without drama, without anyone seeing her coming. She wondered sometimes what that said about her. She had not yet decided. He told her about his family on a Tuesday. They had been in Lagos for 3 weeks, his longest visit yet, arranged around a project his firm was consulting on in Echo Atlantic, and she had grown accustomed to his presence in her space in a way that did not feel like accommodation. He took up room without apologizing for it, but he also moved around her carefully, the way someone moves around a space they respect. He had learned where she kept things. He had stopped asking and started knowing. These were small domestic intimacies that landed differently from how they had landed with Marlon, where the same knowing had felt like entitlement. With Gong-yo, it felt like attention. The difference was everything. They were at her kitchen table, with the remains of a meal between them. She had cooked, he had tried to help and been gently redirected, which had made him laugh at himself with a completeness she found entirely disarming. When he said, "There is something I need to tell you," and the way he said it, with the specific stillness of someone who has been deciding when, rather than whether, made her set down her glass. She waited. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at her. "My family," he said, "is not simply wealthy." She held his gaze. She said nothing. "His father," he explained, with the careful precision of a man translating something that did not have a clean version in any language, had built what he called his business empire, the way certain kinds of empires were built in South Korea in the post-war decades, through construction contracts, through political relationships, through the specific geography of power that existed in places rebuilding themselves faster than their institutions could keep up with. His grandfather had been the foundation. His father had been the architect. And somewhere in the layering of legitimate enterprise over original methods, the Kwon family had become the kind of name that other names deferred to in rooms where the lights were low and the conversations were not recorded. "Not criminal," he said. He paused. "Not cleanly." Genevieve looked at him. He said, "I grew up knowing that the life I lived was paid for by things I was not asked to understand. I was sent to London for university, then to Paris, then to Copenhagen for postgraduate work. I was given distance," he said, "as a gift, as protection. And I chose to believe for a long time that the distance made me separate from it." She said, "And does it?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My father believes that what I do with my life is my own business, as long as I do not embarrass the name. He has never asked me to participate in anything I found unacceptable.
He has also never asked me whether I found anything unacceptable." She looked at him for a long time. She said, "Why are you telling me this now?"
He met her eyes and said, "Because Marlon came back, and because the way he came back tells me he has found out about my family, and he is calculating what that information is worth. And because you deserve to know the full shape of what you are standing next to before someone else gives you a distorted version of it and calls it a warning." The kitchen was very quiet. She said, "How do you know he found out?" He reached into his jacket pocket and placed his phone on the table, screen up, a message visible. She looked at it. It was from a number she did not recognize, sent to Gong Yo 2 days earlier. It said, "You think she knows who you really are? Tell her about Busan 2019. Tell her about your father's associates. Tell her what the Kwon name actually means in certain rooms, or I will." She looked at the message for a long time. Then she said, "What happened in Busan 2019? He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not guilt exactly, something older and more complicated. He said, "I was 25. My father asked me to attend a meeting as his representative. I didn't fully understand what I was representing. When I did understand, I left. And I told my father I would not be his representative in those rooms again. And he respected that, because respecting that cost him nothing." She said, "And the people in that room?" He said, "They are still in those rooms. Some of them are associates of my father's. I have not severed that connection, because severing it would require my father to do something he will not do. And I have not yet decided what to do about that." Genevieve sat with this. She sat with it the way she sat with difficult documents, turning it over, looking for the pattern beneath the surface data. She was aware that she was doing this, aware that the analytical part of her brain had activated in the way it activated when she needed to make a decision that would have consequences she could not fully predict. She was also aware, underneath that, of something simpler. She was aware that he had told her, that he had chosen the timing carefully and had told her before the alternative arrived. That the message on his phone was 2 days old, and he had sat with it and decided that she deserved the information from him rather than from a man who would weaponize it. She said, "Marlon found this out, and he's using it." Gong Yo said, "He's trying to use it. There's a difference." She said, "Is there?" He looked at her steadily. "Only if you decide there is," he said. She looked out the kitchen window at the Lagos evening settling over the street below. The sound of the city coming through the glass, distant and continuous, the way a city always sounded when you were trying to think clearly. She thought about Marlon. She thought about the specific mechanics of how he operated, the way he always found the leverage point first, the way his charm was always downstream of a calculation. She thought about a man who had spent months rebuilding himself into something more compelling, and had apparently spent some of that time doing research. She said, "He's not coming back because he misses me." Gong Yo said, "No." She said, "He's coming back
back because he thinks this information gives him something. Gongyo said. Yes. She said, what does he think he can do with it? Gongyo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, he sent a message to my number that he should not have been able to access. That tells me he has made connections I am not fully aware of. He is not simply an angry ex-husband. He is an angry ex-husband who has found an angle. And men like that are more dangerous than men who are simply angry. Genevieve looked at him. She said, are you afraid of him? He said, no. Then he said, I'm afraid for you. There's a difference. She felt that land. She let it land. Then she said, what does your family know about this situation? He said, nothing yet. And then he said, and I would like to keep it that way for as long as possible. Because once my family knows there is a problem, they solve it in ways I cannot control and did not ask for. And I do not want this solved that way. She understood what he was saying. She understood it completely. She also understood that he was, in this moment, choosing her version of the world over his family's version of it. Choosing the slower, cleaner, more vulnerable path over the one that would be faster and messier and entirely outside her. She said, what do you want to do? He said, I want to handle it the way you handled Marlon the first time. She looked at him. He said, with information, with documentation, with the kind of quiet precision that doesn't give someone anything they can call aggression. She almost smiled. She said, you watched me do that. He said, I paid attention to everything about you from the beginning. That's not something I apologize for. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, all right, tell me everything. And they sat at the kitchen table until 2 a.m, going through what he knew and what she knew, and what the shape of the problem actually was. The way 2 intelligent people sit with a difficult document and map it together. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, she thought, this is what partnership actually feels like. Not one person carrying while the other plans. Both of them carrying. Together. Marlon, meanwhile, was doing what Marlon always did when he believed he had found leverage. He was becoming patient. This was the most dangerous version of him. The impatient Marlon was readable. The charming Marlon was detectable once you knew the mechanics of it. But the patient Marlon, the one who went quiet and strategic and waited for exactly the right moment, was the version that had operated for years inside her marriage without her seeing it clearly. She saw it clearly now. He had not returned to her door after the Thursday visit. He had sent no messages. He had made no appearances at mutual connections. He had done absolutely nothing. And the nothing was louder than everything he had done before. She knew this pattern. She had documented it in the months of her marriage. Marlon's silences were never empty. They were loading. What she had not anticipated was the direction from which the next move would come. It came from her office. She had a colleague named Funke who she had considered a friend for 3 years in the uncomplicated way colleagues became friends, through shared lunches and venting sessions, and the particular solidarity of 2 capable women navigating the same institutional landscape. Funke was smart and warm, and had the gift of making everyone in a room feel included, which Genevieve had always admired.
She had not understood until now that this gift was also a tool. Funke came to her desk on a Wednesday morning with the specific brightness of someone delivering something they have convinced themselves is being done out of care. She said, "Can I talk to you privately?" And Genevieve said yes, because she said yes to Funke automatically, because 3 years of shared lunches had made the yes automatic, and she followed her into the small meeting room at the end of the corridor. Funke closed the door. She sat down. She folded her hands on the table with the practiced body language of someone who has rehearsed this. She said, "I ran into Marlon over the weekend." Genevieve said nothing. Funke said, "He's not doing well." Genevieve said, "I'm sorry to hear that." Funke looked at her carefully. She said, "He said some things about the man you're seeing. He said he was worried about you. He said there were things you didn't know." Genevieve looked at her colleague, this woman she had sat with through her own divorce 3 years ago, this woman she had brought food to in the aftermath of that ending, this woman whose children she knew by name, and she felt something very cold and very clear settle in her chest. She said, "What things?" Funke said, "He said the man has connections to some very dangerous people. He said he didn't want to see you hurt." Genevieve said, "Marlon doesn't want to see me hurt." Funke heard the flatness in it and shifted slightly. She said, "I'm just passing on what he told me. I thought you should know." Genevieve looked at her for a long moment. She thought about the months she had spent understanding how Marlon operated. She thought about the way he moved through relationships, finding the person with the conscience and working it. She thought about Dele, who had come to her with guilt and had inadvertently given her what she needed. She thought about Funke, who was doing the same thing without understanding she was a vehicle rather than an agent. She said, "Funke, how did Marlon find you?" Funke blinked. She said, "He called me. He said he'd found my number through..." She stopped. Genevieve said, "Through who?" Funke said, "He said through a mutual contact, but I didn't ask specifically." Genevieve said, "He sought you out. He found your number through someone, and he called you specifically. Not our other colleagues. You." Funke was quiet. Genevieve said, "He called you because you're the person who would feel the most responsible, because you care about people, and he knew that about you, and he used it." Funke looked at her with the expression of someone who has been handed a mirror at an unflattering angle. Genevieve said, "I'm not angry at you. I need you to understand that. But I need you to also understand that Marlon has been finding people I trust and feeding them information designed to turn me against someone who has done nothing to deserve it. This is not care. This is a campaign." Funke said, quietly, "I didn't know." Genevieve said, "I know you didn't." She paused. She said, "What exactly did he tell you?" Funke told her. It took 10 minutes. Genevieve listened to the entire thing with the specific attention she had developed over the last 18 months for detecting the architecture of a narrative that had been constructed to produce a specific response. Marlon had been thorough. He had used real information, the Kwan family name, the business connections, a carefully selected version of events that contained enough truth to be believable and enough omission to be entirely false. And he had delivered it through a person whose credibility with Genevieve was established and genuine. She thought, not for the first time, that Marlon was genuinely intelligent, that if he had applied this intelligence to anything other than the management of people for his own benefit, he might have been extraordinary. She said to Funke, "Thank you for telling me. I mean that." And then she went back to her desk and she called Gong Yo and she said, "He's moved to my workplace. He's using people I trust." And Gong Yo said, "I know. My firm's Seoul office received an anonymous inquiry this morning about my background. Someone is building a file." She said, "This is escalating." He said, "Yes." She said, "We need to make a decision." He said, "I know." She said, "Your family." He said, "Not yet." She said, "Gong Yo." He said, "I know what I'm asking. I know what not yet costs. I'm asking you to give me a little more time to do this the way we decided." She looked at the wall of her office. She thought about the boundary notice she had placed on Marlon's table. She thought about the lawyer who had said, "Calm doesn't mean weak. Calm means prepared." She said, "You have 2 weeks." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's enough." He was wrong. Not because the plan was flawed. The plan was good, careful, methodical, the kind of plan 2 intelligent people make when they have complete information and clear heads and the patience to execute it properly. The plan was exactly right. What they had not accounted for was the variable that was not part of any plan. They had not accounted for Marlon's father. His name was Chief Adeyemi. He was a man in his late 60s who had built significant real estate holdings across Lagos through a combination of genuine business acumen and the specific social infrastructure of a man who had been important in the right rooms at the right time. He had retired from active business 3 years ago and spent his time between Lagos and London, being, by all visible accounts, a patriarch in the most ceremonial sense. He attended his grandchildren's school plays. He donated to hospitals. He had a foundation that funded rural schools and whose name appeared on several buildings in 3 states. He was also, Genevieve had not known, someone with whom Gong Yo's father had done business 20 years ago. A joint venture in the early 2000s, construction-related, in the specific geography of a Lagos that was rebuilding itself in ways that had made certain families very wealthy very quickly. The venture had ended inconclusively. Not badly. Marlon had not found Gong Yo's family connections through research. He had grown up knowing about them. This was what Genevieve understood when Chief Adeyemi appeared at her door on a Friday evening. Not Marlon's door, her door, her apartment, her personal address, wearing a well-pressed agbada and the specific expression of a man who believes his presence is itself an argument.
She opened the door and looked at him, and felt for the first time in a long time the particular cold of something she had not seen coming. He said, "Good evening, my daughter. I believe we should talk." She said, "I don't believe we have anything to discuss." He said, "I believe we do." He said, "It concerns my son's future, and a young man whose family I know well enough to tell you things that will change how you see him." Genevieve stood in her doorway. She thought about all the doors she had stood in. The one she had opened to Marlon 7 years ago. The one she had closed gently behind him 18 months later. The one she had opened in Busan when she had said, "All right," to a man with coffee on his shirt. The one at the lawyer's office. The one at the bank. Every door had been a decision. Every decision had been a direction. She said, "You can say what you need to say from there." Chief Adeyemi looked at her for a moment with something she recognized as recalibration. He had expected her to step aside. She had not stepped aside. This was information about her that he was now processing. He said, "The Kwon family and my family have a history." He said, "What my son has not told you is that the resolution of that history requires something that you, in your current position, make significantly more complicated." She said, "What does that mean?" He said, "It means that Marlon was supposed to marry into a family that would stabilize certain arrangements. That he did not do this because he married you instead, which was his choice, and I respected it." He paused. He said, "But now Marlon wants to correct course, and the man you are seeing is connected to the very family whose cooperation we need to do so, which makes your relationship, my daughter, not simply a personal matter." Genevieve looked at him. She said, "I am not your daughter." He said, "I mean no disrespect." She said, "With respect, sir, you came to my home without an invitation to tell me that my relationship is inconvenient to a business arrangement your son failed to complete 7 years ago. I am not a correction. I was never a complication. And I am not going to move because standing here is easier for someone else." Chief Adeyemi looked at her for a long moment. He said, "You are a remarkable woman." She said, "I know." He said, "This is not going to be simple." She said, "Simple was never the option." She closed the door. Her hands, behind her back where he could not see them, were shaking. She called Gong Yo before she called anyone else. She told him everything, verbatim, with the accuracy she applied to everything that mattered. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, there was a silence that lasted exactly long enough for her to understand it was not emptiness, but fullness. A man processing something at significant speed. He said, "My father." She said, "Your father and his father have a history." He said, "I know about the history." She said, "You knew." He said, "I knew about the business arrangement. I did not know that Marlon was connected to it. I did not know his father was that Adeyemi." He paused. He said, "This is my fault. I should have investigated further." She said, "This is not about fault." He said, "It is partly about fault. I brought this to your door without the full picture, and that is on me." She sat down on her couch. She said, "What does this mean for your family?" He said,
It means my father is going to find out about this situation very soon if he doesn't already know. It means the calculation changes. She said, "How does it change?" He said, "My father will want to solve it." She said, "Like you said before." He said, "Yes." "And you still don't want that?" He said, "Genevieve." He said her name with the weight he always gave it. He said, "If my father solves this, it will be solved. Marlon will stop. His father will stop. Everything will stop. And the cost of that solution is that you and I become part of a transaction between two old men who have been circling each other for 20 years. I will not do that to you." She said, "Even if it protects us." He said, "Especially then." She looked at the ceiling of her apartment. She thought about Marlon's father standing at her door. She thought about the specific architecture of what she was now standing inside. Not two men in conflict over a woman, which was the version she refused to inhabit, but two old arrangements colliding and using everyone around them as the collision point. She said, "What if I have a third option?" He said, "Tell me." She said, "What if we don't let either family solve it? What if we document it?" He said, "Document what?" She said, "All of it. Chief Adeyemi coming to my home, the anonymous inquiry to your Seoul office, the messages through Funke, the message sent to your phone." She paused. She said, "Marlon's entire campaign. Documented, time-stamped, witnessed, submitted to the right people before either family can manage the narrative. We make the story public before anyone else can shape it." The silence on the phone was different this time. He said, "That exposes my family." She said, "It exposes Marlon's family more, and it removes the leverage entirely. You can't use information against someone who has already told it themselves." He said, "You're describing doing to Marlon exactly what you did 18 months ago." She said, "Yes, but louder this time." Another silence. Then he said something she had not expected. He said, "You know what that will cost you." She said, "Yes." He said, "Your name will be in it." She said, "My name has been in everything I've ever done. I'm not afraid of it." He said, "Genevieve." She said, "I'm not afraid of it, Gongyo." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I need to make one call first." She said, "To who?" He said, "To my father. To tell him, not to ask him. To tell him that this situation is being handled, and that his version of handling it is not needed, and that the woman I intend to spend my life with has already decided what to do, and she is right." She sat very still. She said, "The woman you intend to spend your life with?" He said, "Yes." She said, "We haven't discussed that." He said, "I know. I'm discussing it now." She looked at the window, the Lagos night outside, alive and indifferent and enormous. She thought about the woman who had stood at another window 18 months ago and said, "You called me not your class," while living off my character. She thought about how much had changed and how much had not, and how the things that had not changed were, she was discovering, the most important ones. She said, "Make your call." He said, "And after?" She said, "After. We do this together."
He said, "Yes." She said, "And Gong Yo?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Say my name again." He said, "Genevieve." She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she opened them and looked at the city and started planning. She did not know yet what Marlon's next move would be. She did not know whether Chief Adeyemi would return, or whether the call Gong Yo made to Seoul would travel further than intended, or whether the documentation she was building would land with the force she needed it to land with, or whether it would simply become another file in another drawer. She did not know whether Gong Yo's father would respect the boundary his son was drawing, or whether old men with long memories and patient arrangements simply waited for younger people to run out of energy and then resumed. She did not know any of this. What she knew was the table in front of her, the notebook, the pen, the specific ordered intelligence of a woman who had done this before and had found, at the end of it, something worth protecting. She opened the notebook. At the top of the first page, she wrote, "Part 2. What I know, what I can prove, what I will not surrender." And then she began. Somewhere across the city, Marlon was on the phone with his father. His voice was lower than usual, the register of a man receiving instructions he had not expected to need. In Seoul, an old man sat at a desk with a view of Han River and read a message from his son, and was quiet for a long time before he responded. And in a filing cabinet in an office building across Lagos, a document existed that neither Marlon nor his father, nor Gong Yo's father, knew about. Something Genevieve had filed 6 weeks ago on the advice of her lawyer. Something that had been sitting there patiently, the way good preparation always sat, waiting to be needed. She had not mentioned it to anyone. Not yet. What is in that document? And who will get to it first? Part 3 is coming, and nothing about it will be simple. If this sequel held you, if you felt the tension building in ways you didn't expect, give it a like, because it genuinely helps this story reach more people. Share it with someone who needs to see what a woman looks like when she stops being afraid and starts being strategic. Subscribe, because Part 3 is going to answer every question this part just asked, and it will not be gentle about it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what you think is in that document. Tell me what you think Gong Yo's father is about to do. Tell me whether you trust Chief Adeyemi's silence. Genevieve is still listening, and so am I.